Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to hand over to Colin and Jeremy very shortly, but before I do that, I just want to go through a little bit of housekeeping, a bit of Zoom etiquette, just so that we know what's happening. Many of you will be familiar with Zoom, I'm sure, in this new world of ours, but for those of you that are new to it, I'll just run through a couple of things. You will see at the top right-hand corner of your screen an option to select either gallery view or speaker view. I suggest that while the guys are speaking that we look at speaker view. That way we'll see each person will come up. We can see their beautiful faces in full screen as they speak. At the end, you might want to go, if we go to Q&A at the end, you might want to go back to the gallery view where you see this whole sort of celebrity squares thing. Just on that note, I'm going to tell you now that we're recording this session. So if you do want to, you can actually turn your video off in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And then back up in the top right, there's an option to make it full screen, which is probably a good idea for when we see the photographs, because you can see them full screen then. I've already muted everybody, but at the end, there will be a Q&A. So if anybody's got any questions, there's a chat function in the bottom. If you type those questions as they occur to you along the way, at the end, when Jeremy and Colin have finished talking, I will come to you individually and unmute your microphone. You can talk directly to them. That's it. I hope that's all reasonably clear, and I'll hand over straight to Jeremy Sutton-Hibbert and Colin McPherson. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig. Well, for people who don't know me but know Colin, I've known Colin for 20 odd years, I think, 25 years, I'm not exactly
30,
sure. How long?
30.
30. Just seems like 25, it's gone so fast. And for many of those years, this the image of Colin's that we're going to talk about tonight has been one of my favourite images from Scotland. I honestly think, hand on heart, think it's one of the best photographs ever to come out of Scotland. And as a professional photographer myself, working pretty much the same as Colin in editorial and light and galleries, etc., it's an image which I'm incredibly jealous of. There's not too many images which I think, I wish I'd taken that one. But this one we're going to discuss tonight is very much an image like that. It's just so perfect in so many ways. But let's hear from Colin all about it. Let's get into the nitty gritty of the day and the weather and the salmon and the hailstones and hear how he did it. So Colin, I think for people who don't really know the project, maybe it's good just to give us a wee bit of background to the project before we get stuck into this one frame, you know.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you, Craig, as well. And thanks very much for everybody who's joined us in the Zoom event and also on Facebook. Hi to you all out there. I don't know how many of you are out there on Facebook, but I'm competing against the best weather we've ever had. So I'm very grateful that you've made time to come and attend this event. Thank you very much. Yeah, so by the time I took this picture in year 2000, so 20 years ago today, I'd already been working on the project for about 5 years. And the project came about, it was really by accident. And one of the people in our, at the event today, Fiona Blakey, up there in Argyll, she was living in Angus at the time on the East Coast. And I was up visiting, we went for a walk along those massive, big, beautiful beaches. It's fantastic on the East Coast of Scotland. If you don't know that area around kind of St Cyrus and Kinnaber and Montrose, Lunan Bay, beautiful. And I saw these sort of structures on the beach, sort of nets and poles and what have you. And I asked her, I said, what is that? I mean, I thought I knew everything about Scotland, but she said, oh, those are salmon nets. And immediately I thought, wow, they look really interesting. So I made some inquiries. That was in 1995. Found out that they were all owned at that time by one company, Joseph Johnson and Company of Montrose. I found a man called Bob Ritchie, more of whom later, and I organised just to come up from Edinburgh, where I was living at the time, and photograph them constructing one of the nets, which they did in the spring every year for the summer's fishing. So it was very much an editorial idea that I had, and I took the picture, and it was reproduced in the Independent newspaper for whom I was working at the time, and that just fired my imagination, really.
And was that on an assignment, or was that kind of self-initiated?
just self-initiated. As I said,
were you doing a lot of self-initiated at that time?
I was, yes. I mean, because I was working for a couple of newspapers, principally the Independent in Scotland, the onus was, as well as them telling me what they wanted me to go and photograph, the onus, as you know, was on coming up with, you know, nice ideas for stories, images and things like that. And this just ticked the bottom. I mean, the Independent back then was, you know, a broadsheet, loved its black and white, you know, gave real big licks to photographs. And it was just a very simple image that I took of the men, of one of the men up one of the poles, and then the sort of the ropes all sort of draped in the wind. Very simple image. They just used the one image, but at that moment I immediately thought, there's more to this than meets the eye.
And I know from talking to you about this project over the years that, you know, there's been certain photographers who've influenced you or inspired you, and there's been certain photographers in Scotland who've obviously covered the kind of salmon fishing. I know Werner Kissling was an inspiration to you. Were you aware of his work at this time when you were shooting these very first images, or did that come later? I
can't remember if I was aware. I think I was, because Werner Kissling was a very interesting man. He was a German aristocrat who'd served as, I think, the cultural attaché in London during the 1930s, and was so appalled by the Hitler government that he resigned his position and he emigrated to Scotland. When he was in Scotland, he did various things. He went to the Western Isles and took some amazing photographs, and I think that's when I was already aware of that. I'm not sure if I was aware of his connection with salmon netting, which was mainly on the Solway in the southwest. And I think Craig has actually got, I think we've got a slide of a publication that really inspired me. I think Craig can possibly share that in a second. Werner Kissling was really interesting because his approach, he wasn't a professional photographer. And so what he did was, he was more a sort of what would you say? He was a sort of documentarist. So he was more interested in the actual processes of what was going on. So rather than thinking about photography as an art, he was really into the nitty gritty. He was about, you know, how things were made, what things looked like, who worked on them. And I think if we have a look at the next slide there, Craig, you'll see that was kind of Werner Kissling's approach. It was very, very kind of structured. It wasn't much art. It was very much, you know, here's what you're looking at. This is what it means, categorizing everything. And that was my approach to start with. When I started this project, I had that kind of slightly, I wasn't stepping back and thinking about the kind of drama and the art in the moment. It was very much about documenting, as was then, the last salmon netters in Scotland, because they were decreasing in number at a rapid rate. It was just about getting there in time to photograph a lot of this stuff.
Where did you get that little booklet from? That looks like a beauty.
It is. It was given to me. It was a friend just had picked it up in a second-hand shop and sent it to me. Very, very grateful for that. Yeah, it was a bit of an inspiration.
It's lovely. Looks nice. I'd like to see something. So before we get down to the Hailstones image, how long had you been shooting the salmon project for before you got to the image you're going to talk to tonight? Early in the project, or? Well,
no, I was already 5 years in. So I started in '95, and I was living in Edinburgh at the time. So I concentrated on the east coast of Scotland, because at that point, everything on the west coast had already gone. There was I think there was one or two fishermen, but sadly I never caught up with them. The north coast, there was still quite a lot going on, but I mean, that was a hell of a trek. I mean, you'd have to go up there and spend a week up there, which is what I eventually did. But the east coast was just within range. So I would literally get in my car when the mood took me, or when I had a day off. In those days, I was working flat out for the newspapers. So there weren't actually that many days off. Happy days, I can tell you. So I would look at the weather. I would maybe think about, you know, have I got a day here that I could fit it in? So the work on the project through sort of 96, 97 and 98 was very much about fitting it in around all the other work I did. And I would just get in the car and scoot up there, by which time I'd kind of established a bit of a relationship and a rapport with a number of the people who were still fishing.
how were you doing that? How were you finding these guys, these fishing stations? How were you getting introductions?
Oh,
I guess once you're in,
yeah,
you get introductions to the next one up the road, the next one up the next town, sort of thing.
it was smoke and mirrors. It was there was something very Scottish about it. Nobody would tell me anything. It was really interesting. Everybody guarded all their secrets. So by the time I sort of got really into the project, the big companies, the Tay Salmon Company, Joseph Johnson's, they'd gone. They'd been wound up. So there was individual netsmen who had their own little patch, often only a couple of miles apart, some on sort of rocky foreshores, other with bag nets in the sea, and then some on the beaches. But they were so competitive and so secretive, to actually get any information about what was happening 3 miles up the road was almost impossible. But as I say, I found this one guy, Bob Ritchie, who had been what was called the Wild Superintendent, which I think has got to be one of the best job titles in the world. And he was very kind, and he kind of put me on to one or two other people. And yeah, I would just go up, and the way they fished, of course, they would fish. They started the fishing in April and they finished in August on the east coast there, and they would fish twice in 24 hours according to the tides. They'd fish on the ebb tide, so it was always advancing by an hour a day. So I was never going up there at the same time. So often it was like getting up at 4 in the morning and going up to catch the fishing at 6 in the morning, or getting up at lunchtime if I was lucky, for a 2 o'clock start. So
early for your art.
You gotta get up early for your art, yeah.
So what about this image then? Like, take us to this period in the project. How did you come to be there that day? Had you worked with these guys previously, or was this the first day out with them? Or
yeah. So the guy in the background is Bob Ritchie. So it was his fishing. He owned that fishing, and the other chap was a guy called Jim Mitchell who worked for him. So when you went up there, Bob had 2 or 3 people working for him. So you never quite knew who was going to be there. And that was the nice thing about the different stations, that the man that owned them was always there, but then there was a sort of little cast of characters. So it was interesting. I was looking back at the negatives and things like that about the day. And this will absolutely horrify you, Jeremy. I only took 6 rolls of film that day.
6 rolls? That's like, it's nothing in that.
It's nothing.
I'm always fascinated to know how many rolls of film photographers have shot on projects, because from that you can learn a lot. Are they a prolific shooter? Are they shooting really tight? 6 rolls of film is not a lot.
But within that, and we'll see in a minute, I actually have got 3 or 4 images that are absolutely central to the project, which is really interesting from the one day. And it was because of the day had a magic about it. I mean, if you know the east coast of Scotland, it doesn't get a lot of sunshine a lot of the time. So a lot of the time it could be quite grey and quite cold and rather indistinct. But this day, it reminded me a little bit of today in the sense that it was very hot. It was probably the hottest day I've ever photographed. And I'm in my waders, but at the same time, as soon as you get out on the water, it's cold, so you've got a jumper on. So you're sort of fishing between the beach, you're sort of working between the beach and the actual net. And the day itself was really, really hot. So what I did, it was an afternoon fishing. So I got up there, you had your niceties. I would meet down at the fishing station, which was the bothy down on the beach. They'd get all their equipment together to go and fish. And for some of them, they needed a boat. So the boat would be rigged up on a bogie and pulled by a tractor, and that was great fun because you sort of jumped on the back of the tractor and you were going along the beach.
I remember in the movie Catching the Tide, there is a 25-minute movie about Colin and Colin's project about the salmon. It's very beautifully shot, and I believe there's a picture of you on the back of that tractor getting along the beach.
It was just, for me, it was freedom, because I was working in editorial photography and it was very high pressure. To go up and sit on the back of a tractor with the sort of sea air and the wind blowing your hair, it was just freedom. And then, you were just using, for me, it was all then black and white. I always shot the whole project right till the end in black and white. For me, that was always key to it. It was different. It was always working in colour for the newspapers. This was something very different. This was not a newspaper thing. This was not editorial. This was a creative project. And you know, I really, really sort of was very specific about that.
It's nice. It's
yeah.
Nice to hear.
So the day itself, yeah, so we had beautiful weather. And I think Bob...
kind of like, what was your expectation for that day, right? What kind of pictures were you hoping for, or what did you envisage would happen in front of the camera that day? You know, did you have, and you know, like, did you know the guy? Like, did you have a good relationship with those guys? Was there a lot of banter?
Yeah.
Was there...
Yeah, there was always. I mean, I would turn up; they would know me. Again, if you know East Coast folk, they can be quite quiet, quite reticent, quite. I would say it's a shyness. It's a shyness. But you know, I got to know them, and there wouldn't be a lot of. There'd be small talk because they wanted to get on. And one of the reasons possibly why I only shot 6 rolls of film is because you weren't out for that long. Once you'd got the gear and everything, you were on the beach, and I think Bob had, he had 7 or 8 nets, and you had to, as the tide was flowing out, you had to get to the chambers as the water was coming out, as it was ebbing, because you had to get in and get those fish and get them out there, because if the water dropped too little and the fish were left floundering in the net, they would damage themselves, so that you would have breaks in the scales and the skin, and that would make the fish worthless. So it was a race against time.
So in saying that, like, you get on well with these guys, right? But did they see you as, were they pleased you were there to document their work and the style of work they did, or did they see you as somebody who was slightly in the way? What did you?
I think it's, with anything, you've just got to earn trust, and you put the yards in, you put the hours in, you drive up, you're there, you know, several times a summer. You know, you just earn people's trust and respect doing that. I want to talk about the picture, but do remind me, because I got a really funny story about that later on. But yeah, so the day itself was this beautiful azure sky. There wasn't a cloud in sight, and we did about the first 2 or 3 nets, and then Bob's looking up at the sky, and there's the faintest little, they're almost like white wispy stripes in the sky, kind of sort of coming over the top of us, and he was looking at them, and he turned to me, he said, Colin, there's rain on the way. And I was scanning the sky, I can't see a single cloud. He says, 45 minutes from now, he says, there'll be rain. And I was, no, there's no way. So we got to think, so this is the 3rd or the 4th net. And you might want to put the contact sheet up now, Craig, because it's quite interesting. Because all of a sudden we came to the net, and Bob and Jim started shuffling about in the bottom of the boat and putting their oilskins on. And we had our waders on, but they started putting the oilskins over the top and everything like that. I'm thinking, I still couldn't see a cloud in the sky. Within about 15 minutes, the darkest, greyest, really blackest cloud had bubbled up from nowhere. And then it absolutely let rip. I have never seen a transformation from summer, probably high 20s temperature, to, it must have gone down to about 8 or 9 degrees. It was absolutely freezing. And it wasn't just rain, it was hailstones. And
it looks like there's a bit of wind as well. There's a bit of kind of white water breaking in the background of the image.
Picked up from nowhere. And at the moment that the hail started, we were already out at the net. And I think you can sort of see, it's funny when you look at the negatives, the first 3 pictures are obviously taken kind of before the rain starts, though they've got their jackets on. And then the pictures in the second row is when it hit. And there was just no time. They were fishing the net. And I had 2 cameras. I often work with 3 cameras, but if I was going out in the boat, I'd only take 2 because it was just too precarious. And I think I was shooting with the other camera, but then I swapped onto this camera, and I'll show you the camera in a minute. Yes, the wind picked up, but I remember making a decision. And the decision was, if I walked backwards with all this hail and all this wind behind me, I would be able to protect the camera. And as it happened, I'd only taken, at that point, 4 images. So I knew I had plenty of film left, because this is all pre-digital, of course. So I knew I had plenty of film, but at the same time, I was just hyper aware of something very, very dramatic happening. And then, well, you know it yourself, then it's just years and years of kind of skill and practice and luck and hope, and even if you're religious, a prayer that it all comes together.
But see, so when it's coming together, right, when you've got that situation unfolding in front of you, I know that, you know, within me, when I'm shooting and you feel it's all coming together, all the different elements are coming together, you then know when you've got the picture, right? And at that point, you can break away to then go and change position, change scenario, do whatever. When you were shooting this contact sheet here, and we'll talk about this contact sheet and the camera and stuff in a wee moment, but like when you're shooting it, when you got to frame 10 here, 5th frame from the top, did you think, as you're looking through the viewfinder, ah man, I've nailed it, this is a great shot, this is, or were you just shooting?
I knew that something was happening. I knew something special was happening because of the light, because of the drama. I recall now, and I've been thinking about this picture a lot in the last few days and weeks and what have you, and I do remember at the time thinking, kind of, this is it. This is, you know, all the days when you had arrived and the, you know, the light was grey and there wasn't much happening and you'd seen it before. When you get a moment like this, it's, you know, it's about stepping into that moment. It's about recognizing that moment and just concentrating. I mean, the other thing, of course, as you know, about shooting film rather than digital, with the digital camera, it's like a machine gun. You just let it go. But it's not like that. And especially with this camera, finite number of pictures because it's film, you're really, really thinking about it. You're really concentrating. Interestingly, one old photographer always said to me about when we're photographing film, he said, if you've seen the picture through the viewfinder, you've missed it.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, but you know, so I just remember at the time thinking, right, I mustn't get wet. I mustn't get the cameras wet. You know, I mustn't fall over because I was going backwards and Jim was coming towards me at a bit of a rate of knots and he's got a good, I mean, that was the other, you know, again, luck. He had a good catch of fish in his net. You know, he could have been walking towards me with one fish in the net. But the fact there's several fish in it and he's actually kind of really grimacing. If you look closely at him, he's grimacing because it's really, really heavy work. And he's
you can see his knuckles are white. On his right hand, his knuckles are white.
Yes.
Or maybe actually it's tell a lie. It's kind of hard to tell that's a glove, actually.
Yeah, he's got big, thick gloves on because of the jellyfish. Because if you put your hands in there and you get stung by a jellyfish, it's horrible. It's all over. So he's got the gloves on, but you can see there's a real grimace because he's heading straight into the storm, and I'm slightly protected. But he's coming at me, and I do remember. It's funny. Go on.
Tell us what he's doing there. Then he's taking the salmon out that net in the background. Yeah.
So it's got
into his handheld, and then he's bringing it into shore, or
yeah. So you've got everything. You've got salmon netting explained in one picture. So you see at the back, there's the net. That's a jumper net. So it's staked out on the beach. When the tide comes in, the tide goes over the top of that. The salmon, which are on their way back from Greenland,
over the top of that net.
Oh yeah, the net.
That net looks a good 10 feet tall.
Yeah. So that'll disappear up to the height of that top pole. That will disappear. So you will not see the net at high tide. The salmon are on their way back from Greenland. They're heading to their spawning rivers, but they're at that point very, very close into the shore because they're heading probably up the northeast, which is just north of that. And the net is positioned, and this is where their skill, you know, their knowledge of the beach and of the fish and of everything, the weather, the tides, really comes into its own. They know where to put these nets. They're not there by accident. So the fish will come, and there's a sort of like an arrowhead, and the fish will think that they're swimming along in total safety, but they will swim into the court. And the figure in the background, which is Bob, he's standing right next to the court. That's where the fish they will swim into that. The tide comes down. As you can see, there's still probably about 2 feet of water, no more. The fish will be kind of gabbling around in there, sort of thrashing about. But you want to get them before the water's away. So what they'll do is they'll untie the little pocket. You'll see there's a wee slit in the net, wee hole in the net. That's been untied. They'll reach in, they'll pick the fish up by the tail, and then you'll also see there's a little wooden thing called a patty, which is just sort of threaded into the net. They carry that. I'm afraid then that's how they kill the fish. They smack them over the nose. They'll either do that there, or they'll more likely, because those fish that Jim's carrying there, they'll still be alive. They'll probably do that when he gets back to the tractor, and on the tractor there'll be a fish box, and he'll probably kill them there and then lay them out in the box there. So, and that whole thing from going out to the net, untying it, fishing, grabbing the fish with the net, coming out, back to the shore, you're talking minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Wow.
So it all happens like that.
There's quite a few things there that makes me want to ask you, right? So you're walking backwards at some of this time, right? Which is a photographer's skill to walk backwards and not actually removing your feet from the ground. But I'm guessing you're walking backwards in 2 feet of water here, and there's all sorts of like little troughs and dips in the sand under your feet. Must have been pretty nervous keeping your feet upright.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not losing your cameras into the water.
Yeah, not knowing what's behind you, this wind, the hailstones. I mean, it was really like, oh God, it's really something else. And if you look at the picture, there's something really weird about it.
Yeah, this is what I was going to say, right? Because the guy in the foreground, is maybe in 2 feet of water.
Yeah.
But the gentleman in the back, Bob Ritchie, who I always think, and you actually told me something funny about this the other day, but I always think he looks like the Grim Reaper. You know? And it looks like he's walking away from the camera, right?
Yeah.
But he looks as if he's in much, much shallower water.
Well, he is. He's probably only in just over his boot, because a beach undulates, and there's no way of knowing, and a beach changes the whole time. That's why these nets were brilliant for small teams of men, because you could move them around over the summer. You used to have things called state nets, and they used to go up. That's the original thing I photographed. When they went on the beach, they didn't move. Now, all the way through the summer, the tide's coming in, the tide's coming out, the beach is moving, so you would often get some of the state nets would be left like high and dry. If you've ever seen the Iron Men at Crosby, the Anthony Gormley statues, some of them are miles out the water now. Others are like buried up to their like waist and up to their chest. It's just because a beach changes. It's almost like an organic thing. So the funny thing about this is the actual net is obviously sitting on a little dogger bank, and a little sort of, whereas Jim is walking towards me through a trough. So it gives that, it's like an optical illusion. And it's funny you should say about the Grim Reaper, because Bob, when he describes that picture, he calls himself the Grim Reaper. And I know you didn't know that as well.
I didn't know that until, honestly, folks, I didn't know that until a couple of days ago, until Colin and I were talking about the image, and he told me that. I never ever knew that.
Yeah.
But I just think it's one of the things that makes the picture so, I don't know, mysterious. You know, you get the dark cloud at the top, you've got the Grim Reaper, you've got the white waves. It's almost like some sort of like end of the days kind of image. You know, you can, I mean, if you look closely, you can see all the hailstones and see all the splashes coming off the water. It must have been really pelting down to kind of
absolutely
causing those wee splashes.
Yeah, I mean, to such an extent was when we got back to the shore and I looked round, the whole beach was white. It was completely white with hailstones. So, I mean, there was all that drama. And then we were talking about this the other day, of course. I mean, you know, it's easy to miss pictures. We've all missed them. I've missed millions. But what just made this and no more is that the fact that the fish are just up above the bottom of the frame. If the bottom of the frame had cut through the middle of the fish, that picture may never have seen the light of day.
But they're also nicely arranged in his net.
They are. Yeah.
You know, and you've got all the diagonals, like of the shaft of his net, the ropes behind them, all leading to him. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nice. Well, over his left shoulder, you've got a net further out in the water. What's that?
Yeah. So that's the furthest net. So we would probably have gone and fished that afterwards.
Right.
So as the tide's going out, so a jumper net would have 2 courts. So that's further out. It's actually not as far as it looks, because this is actually, I'll show the camera in a minute. It's equivalent of a 24mm frame.
Right.
So it's very wide angle. So the distances are actually a lot less than you think. I'm a lot nearer those nets than you think. It's quite interesting. But yeah, I mean, we're just, again, it's a rangefinder camera. So when you're looking through a rangefinder camera, you're working to little white lines. So you're not actually seeing what you get. You're imagining what you get. And it's always, you know, when you come to work with them for years and years and years, you get to know every camera and every foible of every camera. But this had big, thick, white guidelines that I would be looking at. And it was always just making sure whatever you wanted in your picture had to be within those guidelines.
And you've managed to keep the horizon nice and straight, unlike most of my pictures.
I know, and I mean, we're talking pre-digital, pre-Photoshop. There's no there's no, you know, when it comes to the printing, that's the full frame, including the surround.
I've never really shot panoramic framing or panoramic cameras too much, only once, and it was a nightmare. So show us your camera there that you have. This is the one this picture was taken on, right?
Yeah, this is it.
That's a Hasselblad.
Yeah, this is an X-Pan. They didn't make that many of them, and eventually they got banned because they had some sort of metal inside it, and the EU didn't like it. But this was a great camera. This was my go-to camera, but it's heavy. I mean, I'll show you in comparison.
Can you swap like the format that's shooting?
No.
Or is it only panoramic all the time?
What it is, it's a 35mm camera. So the actual inside of it takes a 35mm camera. Not sure if I can even remember it. So that takes a 35mm roll of film, but it produces a negative which is almost double in length. It's the same in height, 24mm, but it gives you a 65mm long negative. So that's why you're only getting 20 or 21 on a roll of film rather than 35. But it's, you know, as you said about the horizon, you know, it's easy because you're dealing with a bigger, longer camera. It's easier to get it right, to get it wrong. But I love the camera. It sits beautifully in my hand. It just.
Don't use it anymore?
I very, very seldom shoot film. That's the problem. I mean, what I would like to do, obviously, part of the fundraising for this, and that's why we're running the event tonight, is to raise a bit of money so I can go back and do the final chapter. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, I mean, film just costs more. It's you know, but I'd love to use it again. And I mean, this camera went everywhere. It's all vulcanized. It's all been battered. Went to the Amazon with me.
Pay good money to get a camera like that, you know, with a bit of history, a bit of heritage about it.
It's great. I love it. We picked it up. I mean, you know, like a lot of old cameras, they sit in boxes. I feel very guilty about them doing that and not being out working. But when I picked it up, there's so many memories came flooding back. It's a lovely camera. If you ever get a chance to use one and put a roll of film through it, it's very satisfying. And it's actually got a motor drive. It's not a wind-on camera, so it's just lovely and quiet. Oh, beautiful camera.
How are you protecting them? Like when you're around sea water, how are you protecting your cameras and the films?
With great difficulty. I mean, it was a juggling act, well, quite literally a juggling act. Sometimes the water, and with that particular picture, you know, the water is sort of heaving up, it's slapping up. And I actually had a second camera around my neck when I was using that one. So that one's up here like this. The second one took a hit. A little bit of water, just the smallest splash. And I remember looking down thinking, oh, that's not good. Salt water is the enemy. But I kind of just wiped it off when I got back to shore, and I assumed it would be all right. And it was absolutely fine for about a month. And then I went on holiday, and I was on a Calmac ferry, and I picked up the other camera to use it, and it had jammed absolutely. Salt had got in. You couldn't move anything. Eventually got it moving again, but you just had to be so careful. But it was a kind of occupational hazard. You just sort of thought, well, it's worth it.
When I was up in, I don't know if you remember, I went up to Shetland to photograph the Brer oil disaster.
Yeah.
And I was out on the beach and water was coming in, and I thought, okay, I'll stop to like head back. This wave was coming in and it caught me around the legs. And unlike you, I didn't stay upright. I fell over. and my Leica M4P went under the water. And it was oily water because it was an oil spill. But a good wipe down of it, I was nearly crying on the beach. Good wipe down, but the camera never stopped.
No.
It always worked.
Amazing, isn't it? I mean, what you're supposed to do if it gets inundated with salt water is get a bucket of fresh water and just stick it in there.
Now that takes bravery, right?
That takes a lot of guts. More than I had, anyway.
So you talk with passion about the camera and about the film, right?
Mm.
At the end of that day, you've got these films. Are you processing and printing these yourself, or
yeah, absolutely.
Did you enjoy that?
Absolutely, and for me, there's always a three stage process when I was doing this project, and it was true with all my black and white work back in those days. When I was looking at what to photograph, so I was looking through the camera, I was thinking about what it would look like when I had printed it. So it was that multi-stage thing. You evaluated what you were looking at, and you thought, how is that going to look when it's printed? Now, that didn't mean I didn't take a particular picture, but what it did mean, I was very, very careful about what I took and how I took it. It was very precise. Probably explains why a day like that, I only shot 6 films. But I was always thinking that, and I processed all my own black and white, and I had a dark room. Wherever I went, I always had a dark room. I lived all over. The dark room was the first thing that got set up, and I used to love going into the dark room, producing prints from it. I mean, through the first 7 years of the project, none of the work was seen. So I would come back, I would process the films, and I would make little 10x8 contact prints, and they would sit in a box, and occasionally 1 or 2 of them would come out and would be maybe published in a newspaper or something like that. But really nothing got seen of the project until I had my first exhibition in 2002. So I was just sort of gathering all this information, documenting it, because in my head, what I was doing, I was documenting the last salmon netters in Scotland. And that's what it was. That's how it turned out to be.
I think it was the great American photographer Lee Friedlander said, somebody asked him once, how do you know when a project is finished? And he said, when the lid doesn't go on the box of prints, it's finished. Yeah. Or when the lid doesn't go on the box of prints, it's time to open the box and assess what you have.
Yeah.
Until that point, you just keep putting the prints in the box.
There was an element of that, and also because it was something I wasn't doing, it was semi-regular. It didn't feel like it had a great deal of momentum about it. For me, it was an antidote as well. As I said, to all the sort of newspaper and media stuff. It was freedom. It was, going down on a beach on a beautiful day, taking stunning photographs.
I think it's moments like that we're doing photography for, right? To learn things, to learn about different occupations, to learn about different people and lifestyles. Certainly for me, that's why I do pictures. Like, to me, it's not about the final image. It's more about experiencing the moment, and it sounds very much like that for you.
And also just the fact that you're working on something that is building and building and building and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's a sort of journey without an end. Because as you know, in newspapers, it's finite. It's all gone. The next day, you're on to the next thing, and I would really have to chisel out time to go up there. But I really feel I kind of maximised the time I was up there. And eventually, I sort of branched out from just doing the East Coast. I got some contacts on the North Coast, and I spent, as I say, I would go up, I camped, I drove up there and camped for a week, and then we were doing fishing all day and all night, and I met all the guys on the North Coast, and
sounds bliss.
Friends. Sorry?
It sounds like bliss.
Absolute bliss. And the men became friends. So after the fishing that day, for example, Bob would say, come in for a cup of tea. So I would sit in his front room, and we would chat away, and he would have a mug of tea, and his wife would always come through with plates of sandwiches and stuff like that, which is great,
I thought you were going to say plates of salmon there.
Yeah, plates of salmon. Tell you what, that's one thing you never got. You
don't eat the profits, right?
Never got a salmon.
Did you give them copies of this image?
I was always up for sharing everything, and that was the funny story with Bob. And you asked earlier about sort of approval and kind of recognition. So this is sort of later on. I think this was after this image was taken, and I was sitting in Bob's, and we were having a cup of tea, and I'd brought up a selection of 100 10x8s, just test prints, and none of the men had ever seen any of the work before.
Oh, that's a bit nerve-wracking.
It was horrific. I'm sitting in this big armchair and he's sitting opposite me. I said, well, we've got some prints. I'd like you to have a wee look at them, just take a wee look. And this was stuff I'd been, I'd shot over 3 or 4 years, I reckon, by then, possibly even more. And it was also featuring some men that he didn't get on with, because he had people that he was, let's put it politely, were the competition. And they all had history, because they'd all been working together for many years, some of them in the big company, and they would all have their falling out and all this. So anyway, I knew who got on with who and who didn't. So I handed this box of 10x8s over, and he takes the lid off, and he's going through them one by one, looking at them in complete silence, not looking up. He's got the glasses on the end of the nose, and he's like that, one after the other, just metronomically, not looking up, not breathing, just going through them. Gets to the last one, takes them, pats them down, sticks them back, puts the lid on the box, hands me the box back, and he goes, "Aye, Colin, you've worked hard."
Oh, that's nice. That's what you want to hear, right? That's enough. That's all you need,
That for that sort of man and that sort of job, that was the highest praise you could get, and I was honoured by that. I was absolutely humbled by it. Actually, it was great.
Nice. And does he have a copy of this print on his wall?
He does indeed.
Is this print available to everybody to have on their wall? I mean, I'm very fortunate you gave me one from your St Andrew's Day edition, which it says here, one of 6 frames.
Yeah.
One of 6 printed on St Andrew's Day. That
was very special. That was because that was printed 4 years ago. Because the pictures actually, I'm very, very fortunate. The pictures actually in 2 of the major Scottish collections. It was it, along with 6 other pictures, was bought in 2005 by the National Galleries of Scotland, and they displayed it as part of their new editions, or new work into the collection at the Portrait Gallery. And then 4 years ago, Rachel, who's joined us tonight from St Andrews University, they wanted to make a purchase of the print. And I hadn't printed for quite some time, so I decided to do a little edition to market. And I printed it on St Andrews Day for St Andrews, and they bought that and another, I think 4 or 5 other pictures. And then I sold the others. I actually still have one left. So if anyone wants to get in touch about that,
we'll have an auction at the end.
There'll be an auction at the end, yes.
What does it mean to you to have your work enter prestigious collections like the St Andrews Special Collection? That's a collection of 800,000 images. It's incredibly important and historical. What does it mean to you to have pictures in that?
I mean, for me, it's about the fact that these images will be, available to the public for generations to come. They'll be there forever. And when people look back at life in the late 20th century, when they look back at salmon net fishing and the history of Scotland, those images will be there. And I think that's the thing I like most. I mean, it's lovely to think that they're in these prestigious collections, and it is great. But I like the idea of sort of thinking way into the future, and because it ties in with my development as a photographer. Because when I was 17, my uncle Henning Langenheim was a fantastic photographer, really taught me so much about life and about photography. He came over to Edinburgh from Berlin, and we went to the National Galleries of Scotland, went to the archive in the Portrait Gallery, and he asked to see, he made an appointment, and he asked to have a look at the original Hill and Adamson pictures of the fishing from, the Victorian original prints. And we sat there with our white gloves on, handling these, just pieces of Scottish history. And I remember a light going on there, just thinking, wow, this is making that link between what you do as a photographer. And I was only 17, it was a hobby then. That link between what you do as a photographer and the result of what you do as a photographer. And that was a special moment, and it's lived with me. And the thought that my pictures are in with their pictures in the same collections is just it's very.
I'm sure in years to come there'll be people in those collections holding up these prints and looking at.
Well, I hope so. I mean, the fate of the salmon netsman as well has been. It's been a difficult thing. I mean, I've kept in contact over the years, and the work's been, it's been exhibited. The first exhibition was at the Scottish Fisheries Museum in Anstruther in 2002. And it was wonderful because about, I don't know, 15 of the men came down from Angus for the night. It was a wonderful night. It was just fantastic. And since then, the work's been published, books, magazines, it's been exhibited. So yeah, it's kind of had a life of its own. And that image in particular has had a life of its own.
So where has it been seen? It's been in newspapers, it's been in galleries. You can now buy it as a poster. It's now been brought out as a poster to commemorate that it's 20 years since you shot it, which is beautiful. And it looks like I've only seen the poster via your WhatsApp, but it looks beautiful.
Yeah.
Where has the image been seen since it's been shot? You know?
Well, I mean, it's hard as a photographer to keep track of these things. I mean, certainly the National Portrait Gallery, it's been displayed there. I don't know what they've done with it at St Andrews, whether it's been on display there. I'm not sure. But I mean, I've got magazines, books, and people. This is a very, very important German magazine, Mari, fantastic magazine.
They have beautiful reproduction, huh?
Beautiful magazine, and they did that with it as part of a big. I'd approached them again. I was very committed to the men and their story, and for me, it was about telling their story. It was about them having, through me, having a voice about what they were doing, because salmon netting is always very controversial, because especially at that time, the stocks were dwindling. There was a big conflict between the anglers and the netsmen. The anglers had a lot more power and a lot more money, and what they were doing was they were closing the fisheries down. So the men were always under a lot of pressure. Now you can make an argument to say, well, historically netting took far too many fish. That's certainly true. But by the time I was fishing it, the comparison between angling and netting, the anglers were taking more and more and more. The netting was going further and further down. And don't forget that, Scottish salmon was, an absolute premium brand, premium food. To eat wild Scottish salmon was just the thing. And as it got more scarce, of course, it became more expensive. And then, of course, the other thing is, in came the cages, the aquaculture, the fish farms, especially on the West Coast. And I mean, that for a start, that destroyed the West Coast wild salmon fisheries. Didn't really affect the East too much initially. So there was all this kind of political stuff going on. So there was always, scientists visiting, monitoring what the men were doing. So I photographed a bit of that. But I felt that I didn't want to be their kind of PR spokesperson, but I did want to tell their story. And I thought that was very, very important. I would say I was on their side, but I wasn't going to just be, I wasn't going to be an uncritical friend. But that was a very important thing for me for the project. And as that's developed over the years, the netting now it's been stopped. It's been stopped officially 4 years, I think 5 years has been a moratorium. And that moratorium is basically because the stocks are collapsing. And that has to do not with the netting, that has to do with the environment, the warming, global warming, the sea temperatures rising, agriculture, all the pesticides and stuff running into the breeding rivers. It's a toxic cocktail, and it's meant that the Scottish Government has just said, right, enough. And I think that's it. I was speaking to the association. They've got a very small little association that represents them, and they have an AGM in November, which I always go to, and they were sort of intimating this might be the last one this year, which would be very, very sad, very sad.
When we were talking about the image earlier, and talking about the gentleman in the foreground having the fish in the net, I was kind of wondering, on an average day like that, how many fish is he bringing out of the nets?
Well, that was always quite interesting. I didn't keep a tally because I just couldn't. I was concentrating on photographing.
Yeah, but we're talking like 5. We're talking 100, or
no. By the time I was photographing, if they got between 5 and 10 decent-sized salmon in a net like that, they were pretty happy. Wow. But quite often you would go to those and there'd be nothing in there. So you would come back from a typical fishing like that, 40, 50 fish. But I mean, what they would tell me the whole time is it's just going down and down. The sizes are getting smaller. And then towards the end, you know, in the early 2000s, they would say to me, look at that fish there. And of course, I would look at it. It would just look like a fish. And they would say, that's an escapee from a fish farm. Wow. And that's another massive problem, because the interbreeding between the wild and the farmed has actually weakened the gene pool as well. So it's an absolute environmental disaster of our age.
Well, I know you've told me about salmon over the years, and I've kind of changed my attitudes to eating salmon because of what you told me.
Yeah.
So maybe just one or two questions about the picture, and then we've got a few questions coming in from folks here on Zoom.
Yes.
So I'll read them out. But this image, did you feel it became the iconic shot of the project? Did it overshadow the other images? What do you think?
I mean, I suppose it has done to an extent, but I think just the sheer weight of the work built up over 15 years. And what I hope to do now is go back and kind of do a postscript to it and see where it sits. There won't be any fishing, but there's the fishermen, there's the infrastructure, there's the stories. It's going to look different. So in that sense, it's not finished. So it's hard to say whether that's going to be my favourite picture of all time. But yeah, I mean, it's come to symbolise. Shall I say that? It's come to symbolise the project.
Nice. Is there anything planned for this particular frame, this particular image at the moment? I mean, you've got the poster coming out. It was in your book, An Independent Eye, recently, which you brought out recently. Yeah. You know, it's in the two collections. It's St Andrews and the National Galleries, which you can go online to the National Galleries collection and also the St Andrews collection, and you could type in Colin McPherson and bring up the image, bring up all the other pictures that you have in these collections. But is there anything in the pipeline for this particular one?
Well, not specifically, but I mean, ultimately what I want to do, I've had offers to do books in the past, but I've never felt they've done them justice. It's like you'll appreciate this being a whiskey man, it's like a good bottle of whiskey. It's all just sitting there maturing nicely. And I'm in no great hurry to do anything with it, because as time progresses, I think it just will gather a kind of heft of its own, a value of its own.
Oh, it's already grown that reputation. It's such a great image. I think we're getting on for an hour. We've been talking.
Yes.
We could talk forever about this picture, but there's a couple of questions here coming from people, which I think we're going to open up the mics and let people ask stuff. There's just one or two which I'll maybe just pick out. From Matt Sillers up in Inverness. Matt Sillers runs the Flow Photo Fest festival every September in Inverness. Here's a very good question, which perked my interest. Colin, when hand printing different editions, were you aware of interpreting the negative differently each time?
I think I've got it actually over the back there. I've got my little printing Bible, which has got all the times and all the grades of paper and all the exposures. And I would always try and print things more or less the same. I have an idea, as I said, I always had an idea of what it should look like. I print everything really dark. Maybe it's my mood, maybe it's my personality. I print dark. I don't really do light. So no, I would always try and print it more or less the same. Very difficult, but yeah.
It's a good question. Nice question.
Can you unmute people?
Jenny Reid has a question for you.
Can you unmute her so she can ask?
Craig's going to unmute the people with the questions. So we're going to go for Jenny Reid. She's got a nice question.
Yep, Jenny.
Hello, Colin. And hello, Tim and Bill as well. Hello.
Oh, Bill.
Bill and I are Blue Sky Photo Club alumni. And Tim and I are Eastdale.
And so is Bill. Bill's an Eastdale alumni as well. Yeah.
Oh, lucky man. We had the sunniest weather. What I was wanting to know was, you were speaking about when you take an image and then it develops a life of its own. When that kind of thing happens, have you found that that's taken you off in a creative direction that you maybe hadn't expected to explore?
Yeah, I think it's about the confidence that you get, because at the start, you look at, for the first year, a couple of years, you're looking at what you've got. You may be thinking, I'd refer you back to the sort of way I was working, sort of more Werner Kisling way of working. But as you kind of grow a bit more confident in the project, you become more accepted by the people. You've taken a lot of the photographs already, so you want to push the boundaries, you want to do something new. And I think, I think it is a journey. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but yeah, I mean, I couldn't have taken that picture on the first day of the project. It all evolved towards that point and then beyond it. Absolutely. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Claire Mahoney has a question, and it's something I thought of when you were talking about your darkroom days. So, Craig, if we could open up Claire Mahoney's mic, she's got a nice question.
Well, I'm just curious about how you felt when you saw it for the first time in the darkroom, Colin. And did you know then what an important photo it was?
It was a oh yes moment. Totally, absolutely. I mean, what I would do is I would make the contact sheets. So, but even before that, when you're processing it and you bring it out all wet, and it's like Christmas. Every film is like Christmas morning, and you would like up to the light like that, and you'd be looking. And I remember looking at it, going, "Oh yeah, look at that!" Drying it off, cutting it up, putting it in the sleeves, making the contact sheet, and yeah, I mean, it's oddly enough there are other pictures even on that roll of film which have made it into the project, into the wide edit. There's 2 or 3 that I really like from that roll of film alone, and there's about 7 or 8 from that day. But that particular image, yeah, because I was an editorial photographer, so I was used to making very, very sudden, snap, harsh decisions about my own work. You'd go and shoot a job which had to be in a newspaper the next day. It had to have impact, it had to have power, it had to tell a story. You couldn't mess around. So I was but even, by then, I was what, 10 years into my career as a photographer, an editorial photographer. I could pick a picture, you could see it and go, ah, yes, absolutely. So yeah, it was I do remember it was a lovely moment. I wish every picture was like that.
Well, that answer leads us into a nice question from Tim Brunsden. Craig, have we got Tim Brunsden?
Hello.
Tim.
Hi. Yeah, beautiful work. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I was just thinking about what you said about the film and having a limited number, having 20, which isn't very much on that 6 rolls of film if there's 20. And I used film before and I've used digital, but the way you think about it and not being able to see it and how you approached it, did it make you think differently? And I suppose if you had a digital camera, if you were going back, how would that change your process of approaching it?
It is very interesting because that was the summer, that was the summer before I got my first digital camera. So I was still thinking completely in analog. I got my first digital, which I then started immediately using for editorial stuff. But I never went near the salmon netters with a digital camera until literally the last summer I did it. It sounds funny, and you'll know this, you knew when the end of the film was coming. It was something almost like you had a little ticker inside your head, and you would occasionally look down and go, ooh, if it was a roll of 36, you go 32, and then and especially on that particular project, you would make a decision, right? We're going to go and do that now. We're going to go out in this boat. I want to have a fresh roll of film in here. So even if you maybe had only taken 32, or maybe even with that, maybe 18, you'd wind it on and put a fresh film in. And because often you were putting the film, I had this little pouch thing on the top of I was trying to remember, Jeremy was asking me, this little pouch thing at the top of my waders. And I used to sort of stuff the films in there. I mean, you think about it, absolute madness. Put them in there, and then you'd be out for like an hour, and then you come back and there's all these films in there. The metal canister ones were fine because they just wound all the way back in. I also used 6x6 film, which is all paper. So as soon as you had like any moisture on your fingertips, you know, you were trying to get dry, and there was nothing to dry your hands on. And you were trying to roll these films up and licking it and sticking it down and sticking it away, and then getting the other film out and stuffing it in, winding it on. It was, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said for digital.
Your answer there, Colin, makes me laugh, makes me smile, because I'd slightly forgotten that kind of bit where you think, I've shot 25 frames, I've only got kind of 10 left, should I change the film now or will I wait a few minutes? I'd forgotten that, you know.
Yeah.
The fun days of film. We've got another question from Craig Easton, who is the photographer that's making all this technology work tonight for us all so we can have this great chat. And Craig has been working on his own project on the east coast of Scotland, all about the women who worked in the herring industry, the silver darlings of the fishing industry. But Craig has a question for Colin, so let's hear Craig's question.
This is where the technology will fail, maybe. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you, mate.
Good, okay. So I'll tell you what occurred to me, Colin. You were talking about the weather being beautiful that day, a day like today. And I noticed for the first time, actually, obviously I know this picture very well, but I noticed for the first time you're shooting 100 ASA film, which is obviously the right choice for the morning. When the temperature dropped, did you lose 8 stops of light, and did that cause all sorts of havoc?
Yeah, we were debating this the other day when we were having a bit of a run through what was the exposure. You couldn't, that big camera, you couldn't go down below about 125th of a second, especially if you were walking backwards, you know, up to your thighs in water and, you know, getting pelted by hailstones. So it was, yeah, it was probably shot, I don't know, 128th of a second at f4, which is wide open. That's the maximum aperture for that camera. Yeah,
all the little splashes from the hailstones are all pin sharp, mate. You
know? I know. It's difficult to think back because obviously I wasn't taking. You don't have any of those coordinates on a roll of film. You can look at a digital file and you can see to your embarrassment what you've shot it on. But yeah, it's interesting because that was my favourite type of film, that Agfa 100. It was just it was sent from heaven, that stuff, and I would always use it. Absolutely where. But if I'd known that was going to happen, and I'd known that the light was going to plunge and the temperature and everything, I probably would have put a roll of T-Max or Tri-X Pan 400 would have been in the camera. It wouldn't have had the same impact because it was a grainier film. It just wouldn't have looked as crisp and sharp. It's just luck that I had that film in. Just absolute luck.
You make your own luck, mate. You make your own luck. Paul Adair from Perth Museum and Art Gallery has a question. Paul very kindly gave Document Scotland an exhibition last year. We had a big show there for a few weeks and it looked absolutely fantastic on the walls. But Paul has a question for you, Colin, mate.
Thanks. I was just wondering, Colin, whether you'd photographed on the River Tay. Just at the museum, there's quite a good archive going back to about 1870 of Tay salmon fishing. And I was actually out on, I think it was the last or one of the last, net salmon fishing expeditions on the River Tay, just taking snaps myself for the museum. So there's quite a kind of chronology there of salmon fishing on the Tay. So that's somewhere that you photographed?
Well, you beat me to it because by the time I started in 1995, to my knowledge, all salmon netting had finished on the River Tay. The Tay, what they called Tay Fishing Company, they had been wound up, and as far as I was aware, all the netting stations, all the heritable rights had been bought up by this Icelandic chap who then, I can't remember what was his name, Vigurson, who had lots of money, and he was buying the netsmen out for conservation. So yeah, it had all gone by the time I was so lucky to get what I got. All the stuff in Aberdeen had finished as well on the D. That was all gone. So what I photographed was really fragments, scraps of what was left. 10 years before that would have been a completely different picture. In some ways, I'm glad I was there when I was, because I think it was about the last days. It was about the last men. And I think if I had photographed something bigger, it just would have been a different project altogether. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I missed the Tay. I missed it.
Still, maybe there's an exhibition there.
I hope so, because it's relevant to the Tay.
Yeah,
You know, it was all, people, who fished on the Tay, who live, like yourself in that part of the world. You'll be familiar with the techniques, the in-river fishing and stuff like that. Yeah.
I think in a moment we're going to open the mics, and maybe other people who haven't typed in a question yet could maybe raise a hand, or I'm not sure if there's a wee button down the bottom. You can put your hand up if you want to ask a question. But just before we do that, I just want one last question, Colin. I know there was that 25-minute movie, Catching the Tide, made a few years ago.
Yes.
Which was shown in Australia, it was shown elsewhere, it was on TV in Scotland. Is that on your website? Can people go and view it? Where can people see that movie?
It is. I've given a name check for my dear sister Katrina, who was the director of that wonderful piece of movie making. It was tremendous. It was originally commissioned by Scottish Television and Grampian Television, but it was shot really with sort of film festivals in mind. So it was really high quality. It was an absolutely beautiful piece of filmmaking. Some wonderful people worked on it. It's on my Vimeo channel, so if you Colin McPherson Vimeo, you will find it there. And yeah,
all these links, we can post links to all this stuff on, for everybody who's watching on Facebook. This chat will remain on Facebook, and you can watch it again tomorrow, or if you've missed bits of it, you can watch it. And I guess we're going to post all these links to the poster that's just been made, where people can get that poster. We'll post links to the TV programme. Oh, let's see it. I haven't actually seen it yet.
Poster.
Excellent, that looks nice.
Yeah, thing of beauty. So you can buy that on my website in the shop section. Very nice.
We'll post a link to that on Facebook. We'll post a link to the movie. Be good to see that.
Yeah.
Shall we open up? Sorry, on you go.
I was just going to say, and if those people out there in Facebook land have enjoyed it tonight, there is a tip jar there, and do feel free to drop a couple of coins in there, because it'll all go towards the hopefully later this year, when we're allowed out to play properly, hopefully get started on the project. There's a lot of work. It could be this next final chapter could be really exciting. And
I know on Facebook we have people from quite a few countries joining us tonight. There's some people from Australia. We've got Ireland in Ankara in Turkey tuning in, I do believe. We've got somebody from Belgium. Yeah. You've gone international tonight, mate, with this picture.
Yeah, America, North America. Yeah, it's global.
Man, I'll be on CNN next.
Stop it! I'll get arrested.
Craig, shall we open the mics, and maybe if people could, maybe I don't know how we do this. Maybe raise your hand if you've got a question, and Craig can.
Yeah, that's all done. Rachel Nordstrom and Barry Schillinglaw have raised their hands.
Rachel, let's hear you.
Hi. Right. Well, I think I don't specifically, maybe I do have a little question, but I just want to say, I think the whole project is so great. And thank you so much for sharing the story of it with all of us, because it's sort of representing St. Andrews and our collections. It's great to kind of continue that lineage of Scottish fisheries, Scottish documentary photography, and acquiring your work into the collection was really exciting for me to kind of bring that story, not to its conclusion, because stories, they'll continue, but it was a great acquisition for us. But as you've sort of alluded to the future of this project and wrapping it up, and sort of the funding that you've done now through tonight, and I'm sure ongoing, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here, but like, what do you see kind of the end result of this to be? Do you want it as a book, or do you think it's more of a portfolio, or what are your thoughts around how it should be presented in the end?
I'm very open-minded about it. I think let's see where the work takes us. I mean, there is a book there already, I would say, but it's about timing, it's about context, it's about where that sits and all that sort of thing. And also for me, I think definitely more exhibitions. I think longer term, I'd like to have a really great big exhibition to show as much of this as possible to the world, share it as much as possible, and then have the historical viewpoint of the final chapter, so we can bring the context of the whole thing together. Maybe maybe include archive stuff from other photographers, historical stuff. I think as a resource, and I think that that's where you come in with the University of St Andrews as a resource. That's what I'm interested in, something for the future. Yes, art, beautiful pictures, something that stands the test of time that way aesthetically, but also as historical documentary about Scotland, which is what I'm committed to. That's why I'm in Document Scotland. I'm interested in the country, I'm interested in the history, contemporary and historical.
Great.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
Barry.
Yeah, it was a similar question to the one that's just asked, but I was just wondering whether, in order to finish the project, you won't have to pick up a camera again. It's going to be dealing with what you've taken already, or do you think there is any more you can do?
This is the thing, you just don't know till you start. And I think until I start the final chapter and see what it looks like and how I want to shape it, and how events shape me and the people shape me, that's a very hard thing to put a sort of full stop and say, right, I'm aiming for that. I'm aiming for a set of outcomes. I'm aiming for a time when I'm going to call a halt. What I like about longer term projects, and I do a lot of them, is the slight open-endedness of the whole thing, that you set out on this journey and you don't really know where it's going to end. I mean, if somebody had said to me 25 years ago when I was walking down that beach with my friend Fiona and glancing over to those nets that, I'd be here showing this work in this context, I mean, you can't even imagine that sort of thing. So let's just leave it open. Let's hope for the best that I can, get a bit of funding together, go and do it properly, spend the time, because what the success up till now has been based on is that I was prepared to put the time in, the real, getting to know the people, getting their trust, telling their story. And I want to tell more of the story because there's more to tell. And maybe even because there won't be the fishing to get in the way, maybe the men themselves will be more reflective. Maybe they'll have a bit more of an overview of their lives as well, because it was very difficult. I mean, it was men's, principally the age I am now, very taciturn, very focused on their work, not really having any sort of overview of what they were taking part in, which for me, as the outsider, I could see it. I could see how important their work was, but they couldn't. So maybe the final chapter is about them reflecting on how important the work was that they did.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Thank you very much. Thanks.
It's good. I think that's a nice way to maybe even finish up, look into the future.
Yeah.
We can all meet back here on a Saturday night 5 years from now, and we'll get an update.
That would be fantastic. And I just want to thank everybody in the Zoom event and on Facebook. And I know we'll be posting it on Facebook, editing it, take away the bits of the top and the tail of it. But thank you so much for your support. It's just brilliant. And it's just lovely to connect this way. I know we're going through some really difficult times, and it's just lovely that we're all here together sharing this. And yeah, thanks to Craig as well for doing all the techie stuff, and to Jeremy for not being too much of a paxman, being a great interviewer.
Well, thank you. It's been you've known for many years. It's one of my favourite pictures, and it's a pleasure for me to even hear the story behind it. I love it. So
great. Good.
Thank you for sharing it with everybody, and we look forward to seeing all the comments on Facebook. We'll answer further questions there in the days to come, and we'll post all the links to the poster, to Katrina's movie Catching the Tide, which is, as Colin said, it's on his Vimeo channel. And excellent. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy your Saturday evenings. Let's hear it.
Come on, thank you.
Bye.